Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating journey to decode the entire global maritime industry. Whether you're a student really wanting to nail down maritime economics, or maybe you're a small business owner who's just incredibly frustrated trying to figure out why your international shipments are constantly delayed, or how to untangle that massive mess of import documents, well, This Explainer is built specifically for you. We're going to map out the whole shipping landscape. We'll start way up high with the massive economic forces driving global trade, and then bring it all the way down to the practical, step-by-step reality of actually moving a single shipment across the ocean. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the scale of global shipping. Second, the concept of derived demand. Third, understanding shipping market cycles. Fourth, who builds the ships. Fifth, the step-by-step shipment process. And finally, navigating risks and documents. All right, Section 1, the scale of global shipping. Let's start by framing the sheer size of the maritime transport industry. It's so easy to take for granted, but the scale is honestly mind-boggling. Just look at this number, 80%. Maritime transportation accounts for a staggering 80% of all global trade by volume. Think about everything around you right this second. Your electronics, the clothes you're wearing, the materials used to build your city. The vast majority of it spent weeks out on the ocean. Shipping isn't just an industry, it's literally the most vital conduit for international commerce. Without it, the globalized economy just simply ceases to function. And you know what? This growth is not slowing down anytime soon. Shipping is the absolute backbone of our economy because it's driven by these huge, fundamental global trends. When populations grow, when our standard of living rises, and when nations industrialize, our hunger for raw materials and finished goods just skyrockets. Plus, we're seeing the elimination of trade barriers, right? Meaning goods can cross borders more freely than ever before. So all of these factors combined basically guarantee the continuous, vital growth of the maritime sector. Moving on to Section 2, the concept of derived demand. Now, in economics, derived demand is a really foundational concept. Think of it kind of like this. Nobody charters a massive, rust-covered container ship just for the fun of taking a luxury cruise, right? The demand for shipping simply doesn't exist on its own in a vacuum. It's more like an invisible bridge that only appears when a consumer actually buys a product. So if someone in Europe buys a television that was manufactured in Asia, that purchase creates the demand for the TV, which in turn derives the demand to ship that TV across the ocean. Therefore, the shipping industry's success is entirely chained to world income growth and our consumer habits. When the global economy is thriving, shipping thrives. When people stop buying stuff, the ships stop moving. Section 3. Understanding shipping market cycles. Because shipping relies entirely on derived demand, it is incredibly sensitive to global economic shifts. The shipping market is highly volatile, and it moves in 4 distinct, pretty much inevitable economic waves. First, we have the trough, where the market bottoms out. Then comes the recovery, followed by the peak or plateau, which is where profits just soar. But inevitably, what goes up must come down, leading to stage 4, the collapse. Actually, right now, in many sectors, we often see freight rates remaining pretty low, and that's because of volatile consumer demand combined with a persistent overcapacity of supply. Simply put, there are just too many ships and not enough cargo. Let's zoom in on the real-world pain experienced during stage 1, the trough, because it is absolutely staggering. When there's a surplus of ships, vessels literally just queue up at loading points with absolutely nothing to carry. Operators have to start what's called slow steaming. This means sailing at much slower speeds just to save on fuel costs, simply because freight rates have completely bottomed out. Financial pressures build up incredibly fast. Companies with negative cash flows are often forced to sell their modern, super expensive ships at distressed prices just to survive. And the older ships? They become practically worthless and get sold for scrap metal. It's a brutal clearing out of the market for sure, but it is exactly what sows the seeds for the next recovery. All right, Section 4, who builds the ships? So where do all these ships actually come from? Today, the undisputed leaders of shipbuilding are Asian countries, specifically China, South Korea, and Japan. And this perfectly illustrates the macroeconomics of manufacturing. There are 2 ultimate deciding factors that give Asia total dominance over European shipyards. The first is labor costs. Countries like China offer significantly lower labor costs. But the second, and perhaps the most crucial factor, is steel. Steel is the primary raw material for a ship, and it largely dictates the final price. Because Asian countries, principally China, totally dominate global steel production and consumption, they control the materials. European shipyards find themselves at a massive disadvantage because they have to pay a steep premium just to import that exact same raw material. Now for Section 5, the step-by-step shipment process. Okay, let's break down the physical movement of goods to help you avoid those incredibly costly delays. Here is the step-by-step. Step 1 is the export setup. The seller is responsible for prepping the goods and dealing with all the export licenses, taxes, and fees at the port of origin. Step 2 is freight. In common arrangements, the seller arranges the carriage and pays the ocean freight costs to get the goods to the destination country. And then Step 3 is import. Once the goods arrive at the destination, the responsibility flips entirely. The buyer has to step in, obtain their import licenses, clear customs, and pay the import duties to officially bring the goods home. So the crucial point here is knowing exactly who is responsible for what and when. Which brings us perfectly to our final section, Section 6, Navigating Risks and Documents. Knowing who pays for what is really only half the battle. To avoid those dreaded delays, you absolutely must understand your paperwork, and the most vital piece of paper in this entire process is the bill of lading, or a delivery order. I want you to think of this document as your ultimate golden ticket. It's an essential document that the seller provides to the buyer. Without this piece of paper, the buyer absolutely cannot take legal delivery of the goods from the ship once it arrives at the destination port. Listen, it doesn't even matter if you've already paid for the goods. If you don't have that bill of lading in hand, the cargo stays on the ship and you start racking up massive, massive delay fees. Nobody wants that. So, let's see how all this builds into the legal concept of risk. Like, when exactly does the seller breathe a huge sigh of relief and the buyer starts sweating? Well, once the goods arrive at the port of destination and are officially placed at the buyer's disposal, either on board the vessel itself or at a specifically named place, the risk legally passes from the seller to the buyer. From that exact second onward, if something happens to the cargo, it is 100% the buyer's problem. This is exactly why the buyer has to independently arrange their own insurance, handle the unloading, and navigate their local customs. Wow, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, haven't we? From that mind-blowing 80% volume stat of global trade, all the way down to the exact moment a buyer takes on the risk of a shipment. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to really test your understanding of what we've just learned. Remember, shipping relies entirely on derived demand, which makes it a direct mirror of our world economy. So, considering the highly volatile global economy we live in today, I want you to ask yourself, what new global events, maybe changing consumer habits, brand new trade barriers, or big shifts in industrialization, what could trigger the next massive trough or collapse in the shipping cycle? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that move our world.